So after our last recording about sort of what is Qi and what is Qigong, we still found more questions, didn't we, that we wanted to kind of answer, that have gone a bit sort of deeper into the whole structure of Qigong and so forth. And so do you want to start off with the first question, John?
Yeah, well, one of the things that came up for us is across 2020, there was this amazing thing happened where because people weren't able to work face to face, there was a huge amount of online content offered. So I'm pretty sure that it wouldn't take too much effort, but quite a lot of cash to actually get into training sort of 2 or 3 times a week, every week throughout the year. Um, and it raises the question about what's the right balance between doing courses and getting on and doing the practice.
Mm.
So yeah, I think it's an interesting thing to explore.
Yeah,
What are
I
your
mean, I personally, I find it very difficult because, you know, we're teachers and you and I have been studying Zhejiang Qigong for 10, 15 years, whatever it might be. But there's always new angles and new information to be taken in, even for, you know, when you've studied to that amount of depth. And so when those courses come along, you know, it's quite tempting, isn't it? Just to sort of think, oh, I'll just do another one, dive in. But yeah, it's not always the right answer, is it?
No, no, and I mean, I think back to quite a lot of work that I've done, and you'll come to your sort of annual retreat with the Chinese teacher, and you'll be sitting there, and there'll be a point during the retreat that you go, I know exactly what he's talking about because I've figured this out. This is stuff that I've understood over my practice in the last period of time. Then it suddenly dawns on you that actually what's happened is that what you were taught last year sunk in. And so it's no longer somebody else's information. It's no longer well, teacher such and such says this. It's now something that is completely embedded, that you completely live.
Hmm.
And I think you need to give yourself time to embed this stuff. I think you need to give yourself time to actually absorb and start living the information instead of just having read yet another textbook.
It's interesting because so that's actually the embodiment of the information, isn't it? It's finally kind of come home to roost. So I mean, it's worthwhile looking at that, you know, that process, which is that sort of beginner's process where, you know, you physically do something, and then after a while, your body will quite happily do it for you because you've got used to it. And then you can change your mind state behind that, which is that when you're no longer panicking and thinking, oh my God, what's the teacher doing? You know, then you can start to kind of relax and then, you know, your mind strays off to the supermarket, and then you have to learn to corral your mind back into the place. And slowly but surely, you know, as you work through, you start to quite literally embody it. You know, it does take root. It roosts inside you, and you become that information. But it's not something that happens overnight by any means, is it?
No, no, and I think there's a step that I find interesting on this one, which is that you listen to the information, you sit there and you smile and nod and go, yeah, 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 I got it right. I've got that diagram in my notes. And then you start to practice. And as you say, with the practice, it starts to make more sense. But to me, the piece that really cements it is when you actually test the information, when you test the theory. And you test it not when you're wearing your silk pajamas and waving your arms and legs about. You test it in the real world. You take it out there, you do something with it. You go, what does it mean when I walk into this situation with this new idea, with this new sort of space that you're working with? And at that point, it really starts to become your tool. It starts to become something that this is Gung. This is the skills that we acquire through Qigong. But we acquire the skills by embodying them in the class and then applying them in the real world. Um, and by continually training, constantly training, and never having the space to actually have this type of great conversation, all you do is you carry on throwing more and more stuff into into the pot that you have to process.
Yeah. Yeah, it becomes a never-ending process, doesn't it? And so I think it's also fair to say, though, that people learn and digest at completely different rates. And so, oh, and that said as well, you know, some people just have a terrible hunger for knowledge. And so, you know, that in itself is actually an addiction. It's a very sort of strange one, this, and it's one I've written about a couple of times. It's something that interests me, is the ability to actually chew an enormous amount of information so that you can avoid actually having to do anything, you know. And I've caught up with myself several times doing that, thinking I'll just read another book about it, and then I look at the book and I think to myself, why don't you just do it? Why don't you just practice, for heaven's sakes? You know, when are you ever going to stop? And there's this kind of idea that maybe, you know, sometime in 10 years' time, I'll be able to sit on top of a mountain and it'll all come together, you know. And on the other hand, I might also be dead.
Yeah, but hugely full of information.
That's it. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and yeah, you're absolutely right. Different people take different amounts of time and use different processes.
Yeah.
You know, I know for me, I can, because we were working on this model within the monkeys when we first started. About once a year, we had a Chinese teacher turn up, and we'd do an intensive period of retreat with them, sort of 10 to 15 days. Or we'd go off to China, or, you know, once a year there'd be a real hit. I noticed that there was sort of the learning cycle that happened across the whole of the year. And so I always thought, yeah, on a retreat, you know, it'll take me a year to digest all of this and to figure it out. But that was probably just because that was all I was able to do, was once a year go. And so therefore that's what I see. I think that there is also those weird eureka moments that you get. And the eureka moments aren't necessarily about somebody's just said something to you. The eureka moments tend to be when your practice has been challenged in some way. So maybe that challenge is, we've come together as a group for a weekend and we've done something in that weekend. We've done practice in the weekend, and you'll come out of one of the practice sessions and go, wow, you know, I've just figured something out. And if somebody asks you, what have you figured out? You're probably going to say something that is either deeply garbled and nonsensical, or so completely logical that you're embarrassed that you hadn't figured it out before. But this is the absorption of the information. We need that space in order to absorb. And so we need to understand our own processes as well.
It's just I mean, it's what a ridiculous, redundant thing to say. It's just such a shame that there was COVID, you know, in 2020, because I think, you know, I was feeling quite comfortable with the pace we were getting to, which was, as you say, you know, sort of 10-day chunk of information in say July or something like that. And then we were hoping to get together, you know, for 4 or 5 days as the UK group, you know, in autumn and in springtime. And that suddenly felt like, you know, those little chunks of areas where you were still able to really process information well and work on things that we'd been working with. And also, you know, with Three Monkeys, we had a few weekends dotted through the year as well. It's sort of minor processing, medium processing, and a very large piece of information gathering and processing. And that was, you know, working on a yearly cycle. But now there's this kind of odd addiction cycle where you can now, as you say, you know, every Thursday, every Sunday, and 2 Tuesdays a month, you know, you can take in massive amounts more of information. And also, interesting enough, not have to practice particularly, because it's actually easier to kind of like, you know, just have information calls with teachers and not necessarily be putting the work in behind. So yeah, I mean, I like the accessibility of the online courses. I like the chance that, you know, you can have 2 or 3 different teachers give you the same information from, you know, different angles, because there's not a huge amount of new information, you know, once you've hung around this thing as long as we have, but there's different aspects and different triggers. So yeah, I mean, it's nice that all this information's here, but the actual being and doing in a group, I don't think anything ever makes up for that.
Yeah, it's a really interesting conversation, and I think it's probably the second question that we need to ask here.
Go on then.
Long pregnant pause. So I think it's probably the second question that we need to ask here. The question really is that within 2020, we've got so used to online learning, it's become something that is so accessible for us. It's so easy for us. As we move out of 2020, what is the right balance? Should we just be carrying on with the online and going, you know what, I'm getting everything I need from it? Or do we start interacting in the face-to-face space? And what does the face-to-face space offer us? What is the right balance between face-to-face and online?
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? Because within Qigong, we have this idea, chi field theory, which we mentioned in the last video. And the chi field theory suggests that we are all connected at this chi level beyond that, that is achievable in the physical, although it's also achieved in the physical. But it just means that you don't actually have to be with one another to be able to work as a group. And it's a great, I love it as an idea. And I had my absolute reservations about online teaching. I just thought, God, this is never going to work. And then after a couple of times of trying it, I just thought, wow, it's fantastic. It feels as good as having a physical class. So the actual sort of veracity, shall we say, of doing the online classes, it really does appear to work. So I think that the actual delivery method seems to be okay, but there's something that's not quite there. I don't know. What's your sort of feeling about it?
Um, I can go with the controversial one, or I can go with the less controversial one.
Yeah, I think you better go with the controversial one.
The controversial one is, I think one of the things that we look at with chi field theory is we create the excuse not to do the work.
Uh-huh.
I think it's very easy to go, you know what, today I tuned into this Chinese master. I've got my hit of, that's my practice for the day. It's not your practice for the day. This is your absorption of information for the day.
Yeah.
Your practice for the day is different. And the idea of we're all in the chi field can quite often be used as an excuse to not get on and do the work.
Yeah, it's like saying my practice for the day was watching Dallas on TV at lunchtime.
Yeah.
That's never going to be practice.
Yeah, and bottom line is, if you look at the way that we're brought up, if you look at the way that we're educated, of course we're going to take that attitude. Of course we're going to go, you know what, I've been good. I've just sat down, I've read another chapter, or I've watched another lecture, I've taken these notes. It's just filling ourselves with stuff.
Yeah.
And the bottom line is that we all know, once we practice Qigong for any amount of time, we know that the purpose of Qigong isn't about filling yourself with stuff.
Right.
It's about removing stuff. So sometimes you need to put some stuff in to jiggle bits about and go, do I need this anymore? But do the practice in order to get that information and then allow that to sort through and create the space inside. So I think that on one aspect, the chi field theory around the online can be used as this massive excuse to not actually get on and do anything. And then there's also the piece about, we can have conversation groups. Yeah, great, you can have conversation groups. But again, that's not really the whole picture. You need to get on and do the practice. You need to get on and apply it.
Yeah, I mean, it feels like, you're quite right. It feels like sort of a complementary tool, doesn't it? I mean, it's a very good second, and certainly all the things that we do on our courses, sort of as in having groups of people sitting down together talking about it. Sometimes the notes that your teacher gives and the conversation you have with a fellow student, the fellow student can unlock things that the teacher could never offer to you. So, there's incredibly powerful sort of things to be taken away from that. But nothing beats the experience of it.
No.
If I've heard that they're giving out gold coins on the corner of the street, there's a lot of difference to actually going there and getting a gold coin yourself. It's exactly that. And so it does interest me, the whole thing about the power of it. But I feel like the learning journey is almost like a horseshoe shape. So you sort of start and you have to journey out on this massive, great voyage, picking up lots of information, finding the useful things. But eventually you're going to come back. You don't come back to quite the same place ever, because, the destination, you've changed radically over that period of time. But, we're pretty much trying to come back to the starting point, which is this kind of, as our teachers always talk about, sort of childlike quality and, and getting away from all the complexities of things. And that is kind of how you start your life. But actually, they're trying to suggest that that's also where you want to bring yourself back to, is a complete simplicity. But we don't also want to be back, being fed bottles of milk. Oh, I don't know, maybe you might. I'm not sure.
That's a different program.
It is indeed, yeah. In a nappy, yeah. So let's
Yeah,
but
moving on.
so but yeah, so it is that sort of, it is that kind of vast arc of learning, but you have to realize that it, at some stage, it turns a corner, and it has to become a vast arc of forgetting in some way, doesn't it?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And and I think the bottom line really is that it's finding the balance that works for you on this one as well. It's
Yeah.
much the same as the question about what's the balance between learning and practice. What's the balance between online and face to face? How do all of these things work for you? And yeah, what is that cycle that we're going through?
It's
And I think,
interesting because you use the word balance, and it's exactly right. It's about balance, isn't it?
hmm, yeah, absolutely. And I'll hold my hands up. I've done multiple trainings online with Chinese teachers over the year, and yeah, there's bits and pieces that you can feel that you're embedding that at that, but there's other bits that you're just sort of going, you know what, I just don't have the capacity to really fully embed that at the moment. I know it's there, but chances are it's going to be forgotten.
Yeah.
It's in my illegible notes because I can't even read my own handwriting. um, and so, yeah, where is the value? And I think that you just need to be honest with yourself about what that value actually is.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. There are certain teachers you work with that you feel that, whenever you work with them, there will be something that will be a key that'll open up the lock. But the question is, are you ready to open that lock up yet?
Mm.
And it takes a huge amount of honesty with oneself, because actually with the Western mindset, you just desperately want to keep on learning. I mean, I do. That's my addiction, and my problem is that I would just keep on learning. And the truth is that I just need to keep on practicing. And so, I force myself to. It's interesting to hear myself say I force myself to do practice, but it's true. Sometimes I do have to do that, really force myself and think, no, just put your mind away, because actually there is no difference between, I don't know, well, it is simply an addiction, wanting to constantly scoff information. And so anything that's overdone is seen as an addiction, isn't it?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
And then I
Yeah.
suppose you could equally say, oh, I'm such a fanatic about this, and I'm going to practice 7 hours today and 7 hours tomorrow and 7 hours the next day until your joints are, going, and your back is knackered, and your family relationships are collapsing. And then, of course, you've gone too far the other way and found an addiction to exercise.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But isn't this the piece that we were talking about just before the recording about this balance between intensity and quality?
Yeah.
It's understanding that bit. And you brought up something else there that I thought was really interesting. And it's when people haven't been able to get into one of the online training sessions that they wanted to do for whatever reason. But then as you talk to them, they start to talk about the fact that, well, it's probably good that I haven't done that. It's given me space. I'm able to carry on with my own work. And so I think that, if you have asked Jeremy or I for input as to whether or not you should do stuff, and we say no, it's not that. It's more to do with the idea that you need to create space for your own learning. You need to create space in order to honor yourself, in order to nourish yourself.
Yeah.
It's not, yeah, go back to the all you can eat buffet and gorge some more stuff. It's like sit there and digest, chill by the pool for a bit. This is all part of the Qigong journey, and we should give ourselves the space to do it. We need to find that. Yeah, we need to find that within the amazing range of stuff that's now offered.
And it was interesting because we uncoupled our teacher training course that had 6 weekends in it, and we took 3 to teacher training and 3 to self-development, because exactly, I think, or maybe it wasn't stated by us, but it was that kind of feeling that people needed to put in the hours on the mat kind of thing, to get themselves moving forward in a Qigong way before they moved on to the teacher training. And I still think that's totally relevant. I still think that works. I think it's a good idea, as it were. And so, yeah, it's about putting those hours in, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Well, that's good. That feels good.
Mm-hmm. There is a third question. And the third question is really, sorry, long pregnant pause, because I'm just thinking this is probably going to, we should have finished at that point, but the question about why go to a Chinese teacher, I think we need to throw that one in as well.
Why would I go to a Chinese teacher?
Yeah, I think let's just keep it recording and just keep that bit in, and just see whether this is a useful bit to add in. I feel as if the flow and the conclusion has just happened.
Okay, let's try that fourth point.
So yeah, there's a question here about why there. There's a question here about whether I can actually speak. There's a question here about, well, why study with a Chinese teacher? What is the benefit of studying with a Chinese teacher? Because obviously with this online space, there's now so many teachers that you can study with. So what's the benefit of studying with somebody outside of our culture? What's the benefit of studying with somebody within our culture as well?
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? Because the guys who we work with have all attended Dr. Pang's 2-year training course, and so they have been through the mill. They've learned the hard theory. I can imagine it would have been fairly testing, college to be part of. Massive amount of physical education and a massive amount of, very deep theory to pick up as you went along. So these guys are, peerless kind of holders of this, gosh, I want to say lineage information, Dr. Pang's word. Oh my goodness, sounds terrible, doesn't it? But they do. They they're kind of flagships for his work, and so working with them is fantastic. However, the other side to that coin is that he developed this work to be extraordinarily simple, when it comes down the line. And so, anybody can dive straight into lift you up, put you down and get huge benefit from it. So it becomes, it's a difficult question, that. And it goes back to, I think personally, goes back to what we've been saying, is that there's a crux point, using my horseshoe analogy of every kind of journey. Perhaps now we're getting into a very sort of sophisticated area called holistic horseshoes. Horseshoes that fit inside the bigger horseshoe. Little horseshoe journeys within the larger horseshoe. And there has to come a time when you sort of grab a piece of information, you complete it, it's embodied, and then you can take a new one. So I think that bite-sized learning is a sort of a very valid way to do it. And so I think that you have to be, there's a time in almost every day, every single practice, where you have to think to yourself honestly, where am I at today? How am I doing? Do I need to go and talk to this Chinese teacher? Do I even need to go and talk to this English teacher, British teacher? Or have I got enough information for me to be able to work with this right now? And then I guess at certain stages you end up in a point where you suddenly think to yourself, I'm lost, I don't know what's going on, I need help, I suppose.
Yeah, I reflect on a number of years ago. I had some Chinese teachers staying with me, and I was asked to go and sit in on a one-to-one session, and in this one-to-one session there was a line of questioning being done, or being taken, I should say, being taken. And the line of questioning got very, very direct. It's the type of stuff that if somebody from your own culture said that to you, you'd probably take offense, demand your money back and walk out. But it was accepted as a line of questioning. And it unlocked a lot for the person who had the session. And so we got out of the session, and I was speaking to the teacher involved, and I said, I'm astonished that this is sort of culturally acceptable as a method within the Chinese systems. And their response was, it's not. Within the Chinese systems, we would never be that direct. And so the conversation then ensued. And I think one of the pieces that's really valuable about a Chinese teacher is, because they're not from our culture, we don't let our judgment of acceptable behavior get in the way of learning.
Interesting.
I think that quite often, and it's the same as, when you go on retreat in a foreign country, you get a different experience than you do going on a retreat in the UK.
Mm.
There's something about removing yourself from your normal environment, or your normal assessment of the people that you're working with, that means that you're open to be more challenged. And so I think one of the big advantages of working with the Chinese teachers, or working from teachers from outside of your culture, is that it's far easier to get a kicking and forgive them.
Yeah.
But that's only really one of the aspects. And the piece that you've spoken to, yeah, these guys have got amazing gong fu. These guys have got amazing insight, and you can learn a massive amount from them. But it does sort of raise the question about, well, why the hell would you practice with a Western teacher in that case if you've got all these Chinese teachers? And I'm going to chuck that one back at you and go, why would you?
Just for exactly the reason you've said, is that there's the translation issue, that they deliver it on a different level, but actually working with, hopefully with people who live in the same culture as you, we've had a different cultural experience. My experience has been that somewhere like China, it has had a political history for the last 50 years or whatever, where people don't question. I think probably for 5,000 years they've had the sort of don't question idea, and so when somebody says do this, they'll just yep, off we go and do it. Whereas in the West, our culture is, why would I do that? Why are you asking me that? Why? Every question is why. And so in order to take the material that's delivered by the Chinese teachers and put it through a sort of a Western filter and deliver it, I think what happens is you get, from some China, and it's a great blend between the two, which is hopefully, what we offer at Three Monkeys, which is the idea that you'll get this incisive, knife-like quality from Chinese teachers who can deliver these, cutting moments to you where you suddenly go, bah, but on the other hand, you can also get the same information delivered in a different way by a Western mind who understands how to unlock the keys, sometimes even better than a Chinese mind would. And so sometimes things land really, as you experienced, land really heavily and cleverly from a Chinese teacher. But on the other hand, sometimes they say things and you just sort of think, what? No, I don't really understand that. But translated from a Western teacher, you can get a much clearer understanding, and it might hit you in a totally different way. So I think there's merit in both. And again, it's just tedious when you start studying Chinese medicine or anything along these lines, because the answer always comes back to balance, doesn't it? Just find the balance in the middle.
Yeah, yeah, they're definitely two very different cultures. But yeah, I think that whole thing about relevance that sort of sits behind what you've just said, that Western teachers, we've sort of been there. We know the bits that we can actually follow those questions through. We can follow those ideas through. I think that absolutely is hugely important.
Yeah, it's been interesting for me that we've been on one particular set of teachers' calls, and then we've been running a kind of sort of conversation forums on a weekly basis to digest the information amongst us. And in certain circumstances, I've found that the actual understanding that people carry of what the teachers have apparently said and what I believe them to have said to be, poles apart. You sort of think, really, I don't remember them saying that. And then you start to dig a little bit deeper and no, it's not that they're trying to say at all. In my opinion, they're trying to say this. And of course, my opinion might be wrong as well. But, I suppose having, worked with them for 10, 15 years or whatever, we have a better chance of getting to the nub of what it is they're trying to draw out. And if it's the first time you hear it, sometimes you think, this must be what it is. But then, working with a Western teacher who's been listening for a lot longer, you're able to draw the idea out in a different way to make it more understandable for people who are going around first or second time. So yeah, back to that translation story yet again.
Yeah, I was going to say, it sounds a bit like when I first started studying and we had to read the Dowda. And in reading the Dowda, you were told to get at least 5 different translations because everybody translates it differently. And actually, the best translation that I ever found was by somebody who spoke no Chinese. So they hadn't got the academic stuff getting in their way. They simply lived by it, and they expressed their understanding of the idea that sat behind it instead of carefully looking at the character. And I think that it's absolutely that thing about sometimes you meet people along the way who have just got that ability to express something in a really relevant way to you. Sometimes somebody can throw an idea at you and you can go like, whoa, well, that's just blown my mind. And now I'll put my mind back together and we'll see what's happened. And you'll have a conversation with somebody who was there and they'll go, when he said that, and you're going to be going, no, 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 they didn't say that. You know, it was,
Yeah.
sometimes that directness that we get from experience, I think is really powerful. But again, everything's a translation. Everything.
Oh, of course it is. Yeah. But everything is, yeah, even in your own language, everything's a translation using your own filter system, isn't it? You've reminded me of J.J. Semple, who wrote a book about the Golden Flower meditation, but that was also translated from Chinese into German by Wilhelm, and then a commentary was made by Freud. And eventually you get to this stage, you know, where this guy, J.J. Semple, basically says all of the material was presented by people who never ever bothered to actually do anything that was actually in the material. You know, they've given their sort of views on this, they've given but none of them ever bothered to even sit down and do it, you know. And he sort of said,
Yeah.
the reason why my translation is best because I did it and it changed my life. And you sort of think, well, there you are, that's it, that's the point, isn't it? That's where you want to get the real information. And in a funny way, that's, you know, exactly how I feel about Dr. Pang as well. You know, he's been through it, he's had all these different teachers, and he's created these sort of manuals, but actually it's manuals sort of driven by experience. And then, you know, the thousands of different techniques that you can see in Zhejiang Qigong, they've all been put there for a reason. You know, he started with his main sort of blocks, and then he's gone into little bits and pieces afterwards. And each little bit or piece is a doorway in to the main event, you know, a different doorway for different people. So I find it really interesting, that idea that, you know, yeah, and that takes this full loop back. You know, sometimes you can pick up something with a Chinese teacher that you wouldn't be able to see elsewhere. You might see it in a book and think, what's that? And then suddenly a teacher will say, oh, we're going to do a course on L leg sitting. You know, you think, oh, there we go. So it's quite nice to have these little sort of side things offered by Chinese teachers. And again, once you've seen it, then you have to put the practice in.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I think there's one last thing that I'd like to throw in, and it's, I remember being told about, you have certain teachers that you've always got to consider are really influential within your life. And this was shared with me after spending a significant amount of money to get training from somebody who I thought was an absolute fraud. And let's face it, again, most of us who've been training for a long time will have been in this game, and we will have come across people who we don't necessarily want to be like them. But yeah, there's one of my teachers who I will always hold up, and they will honestly remain completely nameless, as somebody who I would never want to be anything like, but taught me such valuable lessons, and they're very, very dear to me as a teacher. And so always trying to find the perfect teacher, I think, it's a mistake. We need to accept everybody who we work with. And it sort of reinforces this idea that we're very big on within Three Monkeys, and this idea of you should only ever be a signpost, you should never be a destination.
Totally.
And I think that really is the rule. If you go and see a teacher and they're going, be like me, I've arrived, put on your running shoes and leg it as fast as you can, get out of there. Because these people are, you know, you will learn all kinds of stuff from them, but it's probably going to be stuff that is about things you don't want to do.
What happens if they turn out to be a running teacher? That would be tricky, wouldn't it? I was going to say that you are your own greatest teacher.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think that's important, you know, and I think that there are plenty of people out there who can offer you significant pieces of information, but nobody's ever going to get it better than you are. And so, you know, that, yeah, as you say, that sort of, you know, signpost is a great idea, because anybody on a pedestal just requires knocking off immediately. You know, I think knock as many teachers off pedestals as possible, and if you happen to see me heading for one, knock me off that pedestal too.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll second that one.
Yeah, great. The final question is, do you think that we've clarified this at all?
I think there's useful perspectives in there.
I think that's it. Yeah.
I don't think there are hard and fast rules.
No, exactly.
But I think it's always worth questioning where you're coming from with any of it, and going, what's really going to work for me, and why do I want to do it?
That's
Which
right.
part of me wants to do this next bit? If it's the part of me that wants to make sure that I can go and stand in the park and just do something that's a little bit more elegant and a little bit more beautiful, know that that's the part that you're feeding.
Yeah. That's it. Is this the right time for me? Is a big question, isn't it?
Mm.
Right teacher, right time. Why? You know, why am I doing it? And if you can answer all of those, then go ahead. I think that's great.
Absolutely, yeah.
That applies to us at Three Monkeys as well. You know, if you don't think it's time, don't come. We're happy to support you as long as we can.
Yeah, 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 absolutely.
Mm. Jolly good. Thank you, John.
Thank you.